Usually when a president loses, they're supposed to relinquish whatever power they have, and they're supposed to pass it on to the president-elect. Well, we already know that 45 is going to do everything he can to hold on to that power, and he doesn't want to relinquish it. American presidents customarily leave office when voters reject them, like czars, emperors, and would-be prime ministers for life do whatever they can to hold on to their power. To extend his rule until 2036, Russian President Vladimir Putin recently held a referendum to amend his country's constitution. While some Russians publicly opposed the proposal, few had any doubt about the outcome. 2 years ago, Chinese President Xi Jinping succeeded in eliminating term limits that had been established after Mao Zedong's Cultural Revolution, a period of ideological madness that killed tens of millions of people, including family members of the country's ruling class. In his grand presidential address of 2017, Xi stated specific objectives for his nation to achieve by the years 2025, 2035, and 2049. The Centennial of the People's Republic of China suggested that he intended to lead China until at least 2035. If he's still alive by then, he'd be 82 years old. Even in democracy, circumstances sometimes allow deeply compromised leaders to remain in office. Benjamin Netanyahu has already become the longest-serving prime minister in Israel's history, having survived repeated scandals. He is currently facing an indictment for bribery and fraud brought by Israel's Attorney General in the past year, even though he could not win a majority of the Israeli parliament in 3 successive elections. Netanyahu successfully maneuvered to keep his position on each occasion, now in the second month of a 3-year deal with Defense Minister Benny Gantz that allows him to remain Prime Minister for 18 months. Netanyahu has made a commitment to swap roles for the subsequent 18 months. But many expect him to renege on those terms or try to renegotiate them before Gantz takes over. In short, 3 leaders whom 45 has praised have extended their tenure in office. On this canvas, what could 45 do? Undoubtedly, a whiff of paranoia is evident in many claims of potential skullduggery now swirling about. And yet the fear that 45 may not leave office no matter what happens in November has become mainstream. Joe Biden, the presumptive Democratic nominee, has called the prospect that this squatter is going to try to steal his election his single greatest concern. Putin, Xi, Netanyahu, and 45 all differ from one another in many ways, of course, but each has their own reasons to avoid relinquishing their hold on power. Putin, Xi, and Netanyahu genuinely have grand ambitions. Each wants to expand his country's formal borders. Russia's into Ukraine, Israel's into the West Bank, and China's to renegotiate Hong Kong and Taiwan. 45's signature banner promises to make America hate again, and the thought that this could include territorial expansion, specifically the purchase of Greenland, has also occurred to him. The most generous explanation for why these men might believe themselves indispensable is this: who else can any of them trust to achieve their ambitions? The more cynical questions to ask are, if any of these 4 leaders leaves office, who could ensure their freedom from arrest and humiliation? Who would guarantee the wealth and well-being of his family and friends? Historically, heads of the state clung to power until they died or were overthrown. Of the 23 czars who ruled Russia from 1547 to 1917, how many voluntarily handed over power to a successor? 0. 15 had died of natural causes, 6 were overthrown, and 2 were killed. Over roughly the same 4 centuries, China had 16 emperors, all but one of whose reigns ended involuntarily by death or forced abdication. Call it the Tsar's dilemma. However daunting the challenges of holding power, the dangers of losing it are even greater. America's founding fathers recognized this dilemma. They created the republic, not a monarchy, with an elected chief executive. Acutely conscious of the abuses of Mad King George, they designed a constitution of what the presidential scholar Richard Newsat called separated institutions sharing power. By dividing the power up among the squatter, Congress, and the courts, and by giving them separate sources of legitimacy, they created a complex system in which each checks and balances the other. While While that has invited a continuous struggle for power that has made governing messy and often ugly, the purpose, as Justice ba- Louis Brandeis famously explained, was not to promote efficiency, but to preclude the exercise of arbitrary authority. Um, but trusting the constitutional limits on the squatterable power was the wise precedent that George Washington established. When he stepped down after 2 terms, no one broke that tradition until Franklin Roosevelt, who was elected 4 times during the Great Depression and World War II. As one of his colleagues quipped, the only way he would ever have to leave the White House was in a coffin, and that's the way that Franklin Roosevelt exited in 1945. Within 6 years of his death, Congress had passed, and 3 quarters of the states had ratified the 22nd Amendment, which now limits the presidents to only 2 terms, and they can't serve longer than that. But the amendment does not close off every avenue by which a squatter could hang on. Lawrence Douglas, the author of Will He Go? 45 in the looming election meltdown in 2020, argues that the current American electoral system has a Chernobyl-like effect. Nothing in the Constitution or federal law guarantees a peaceful transfer of power from a sitting squatter to his successor. Why would an elected head of the state transfer the immense powers of the presidency to an opponent whom he believes could be a threat to his nation, his vision, and even himself? Just because some people claim that the opponent received more votes in the election in which both parties are pointing to irregularities and abuse. Central to the democratic transfer of power is a norm of deference to process. All elections have many inconsistencies and aberrations, but successful democracies require a strong presumption of respect for the legitimacy of the electoral process. Indeed, a willingness to accept outcomes that are messy, controversial, and perhaps even perversive. Yet, as a poisonous partisanship has spread into every aspect of government, claims of voter suppression, fraudulent mail-in ballots, and abuses in disqualifying voters and counting voters are eroding that presumption. And unfortunately, the labyrinth process between a citizen's vote and the outcome of a squatter election offers many opportunities for the suspicious or paranoid to claim that the election was rigged or the result of a sham. While citizens across the nation will vote for a new president on November 3rd, the winner is determined not by popular vote but by electoral college, which the electoral college is a fucking joke. The process has 4 steps that, under normal conditions, produce a clear result. First, prior to the election, the electoral college votes are allocated among states according to the decennial U.S. Census, which presumes that the census is completed properly. Second, the citizens cast their vote for the candidate of their choosing and the corresponding slate of electors. Each state counts votes according to its own procedures. And third, the electors for the winning candidate in each state meet, vote for the candidate to whom they are pledged, and send the report to Congress. Finally, on January 6th, a joint session of Congress certifies states' electoral votes and declares who the winner is. To win, the candidate must have 270 electoral votes, but if no candidate reaches that threshold, because some states' electoral votes are contested or disqualified, the Constitution says that the House of Representatives selects the squatter and the Senate the vice squatter. In making these choices, each state casts a single vote. That Democrats have the majority in the House today does not matter. What matters is the 26 of the 50 states. Republicans hold a majority of the House delegation. If Republicans retain this advantage after the November election, they will re-elect 45. Alternatively, if Democrats succeed in wresting a seat or two from Republicans in a few closely divided states, they would then have a majority and elect Biden. If Democrats flip only one state, neither party would reach the minimum 26 votes. The Constitution offers no guidance on what happens after this. This November 3rd will be unlike any previous squatter roll election. Some states are requiring in-person voting, while others are allowing mail-in balloting at an unprecedented level. Many are experimenting with new ways to protect the vote from foreign interference. Amid the many possible uncertainties, the outcome of the November vote could be confused as that of the Iowa caucus in February. Could we see failures in voting systems like the fiasco in the Georgia primary election last month, or the long wait for results in the more recent congressional primaries in New York and Kentucky under a cloud of fraud and abuse allegations? Could Americans see both candidates claiming victory? For some readers, the thought of a squatterable election without a dear victor may sound fanciful, yet the United States has endured a number of seriously contested presidential elections, each of which highlights dangers that could arise again this year. In the 1824 contest between John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson, Jackson clearly won the popular vote and had the largest number of voters in the Electoral College, though he fell 32 short of the majority in what Jackson rightly denounced as a corrupt bargain. Adams made a deal with Henry Clay, the House Speaker who had himself been a candidate for squatter but finished fourth in Electoral College voting. For throwing his support to Adams, Clay became Adams' Secretary of State, although he accepted the loss. Jackson spent the next 4 years waging a political war against Adams, undercutting his authority in Washington across America on the grounds that his squattancy was illegitimate. And when the two faced off again in 1828, Jackson this time won by a larger margin, ushering in the Jacksonian Revolution. A decade after the Civil War, the squatterial election of 1876 was even more bitterly contested. The Democratic candidate then, Samuel J. Tilden, beat the Republican Rutherford Hayes in the popular vote, but 20 decisive electoral votes remained in dispute. When neither side could agree on the outcome, the country wobbled on the brink of chaos. The outgoing president, Ulysses S. Grant, developed contingency plans for the martial law. Lest the country returned to civil war, the election was not resolved until months later, when the parties struck a secret deal. According to the Compromise of 1877, Hayes became president, but in return he agreed to remove federal troops in the South, effectively ending the Reconstruction. In 2000, the presidential contest between George W. Bush and incumbent Vice President Al Gore came down to one swing state, Florida. Bush had a significant lead there as election night came to a close, but by the following day, television networks had to retract their announcements of the victor. Without a win in Florida, neither candidate had the required 270 electoral votes. As Florida again began recounting its ballots, disputes arose about whether ballots with hanging chads should be disqualified, and eventually whether and how the recount should continue. The matter finally went to the Supreme Court, which in a 5-4 decision sided with the Republicans, in effect awarding a victory to Bush. In his concession speech, Gore said, Al Gore said, "Let there be no doubt, while I strongly disagree with the court's decision," he says, "I will accept it." Historically, the difference between a would-be U.S. squatter and a SAR has been that the former accepts the possibility of defeat at the ballot box. After a heated campaign 1 year before the nation dissolved into civil war, Stephen Douglas conceded to Abraham Lincoln with the words, "Partisan feeling must yield to patriotism." Yet that clear principle may wither in the face of a close election, especially if the current president is insistent on holding on to power. If our society remains discombobulated amid continuing pandemic, if voter suppression measures keep some Americans from having their say, if mail-in ballot glitches and foreign interference vote counts, and if the exit polls suggest that the election is close, nightmare scenarios become more probable. Under these conditions, America's best hope for escaping the czar's dilemma is for one candidate to win decisively. Okay, so that's the end of that. Now, if you like the video, give it a like and subscribe. And I'm also okay in the aspect of you sharing. I'm all for you guys sharing my videos on any social media platforms that you guys follow. I said, so if you want to share my video on Twitter, Instagram, give me a shout out, anything like that. Share it on Facebook and Reddit. Then I'm all for that. So, but peace and hang out.